I'm just a regular alpha, but my partner is a top-tier omega. A lot of people said I wasn't good enough for Landon Sterling, and he was one of them. But our marriage was just a huge, tangled misunderstanding. The moment another picture of him getting cozy with someone else landed on my phone, I knew it was time for a divorce. Ending this loveless marriage would be a relief for both of us. We were high school classmates and ended up at the same college, even becoming roommates. He was always out late, and I was always the one covering for him. Sometimes he'd have me run errands for him, grabbing snacks and drinks. Or if he couldn't get up in the morning, he'd ask me to answer roll call for him. We looked close, but really, we were just strangers who happened to know each other a little too well. Our other roommates used to joke that he must have saved my life in a past life. And he did. Landon really did save my life. So, I tried my best to help him with anything I could. He was the heir to the Sterling Corporation. I knew I could never really help him with anything that mattered in his world. But I hate owing people. Doing these little things for him helped ease my conscience. College life was calm and full. My daily interactions with him were basically limited to buying him water and signing him in for class. I figured this was how it would always be. Once we graduated, we'd probably never see each other again. That's why I was so shocked when Landon's father came to see me. He was a powerful omega, the head of the Sterling Corporation. He didn't waste any time. The moment he sat down, he dropped a bomb on me. "You're Jay, right? I want you to marry my son." I was stunned. "Why me? You're the first person my son has liked in all these years," he said, gently stirring his coffee. "I can give you $100 million, as long as you agree to marry him next month." He'd said he liked me just yesterday, at a party. The whole class went out and we were playing Truth or Dare. Someone asked him if there was anyone he liked in the room. I was sitting next to him, a little buzzed from the drinks. He hated drinking, so he dragged me over. If he lost, I drank. I was bored anyway, so I didn't mind. But he wouldn't do the dares and wouldn't answer the truths. He chose to drink every single time. Even with my high tolerance, I was starting to get wasted. He was definitely not going to answer this question. I was dizzy, shaking my head to clear it. I could barely make out the shape of the glass as I reached for it. The next second, my hand froze, because I heard him say, clear as day, "Yeah, there is, Jay." I was floored. The alcohol buzz vanished. I turned to look at him, completely lost. Under the shifting, colored lights, I saw a distinct smile playing on his lips. If it were me 6 years later, the me who knew all his little tells, I would have known he was joking. If it were me 6 years later, I wouldn't have just frozen in place, waiting for the uproar of laughter as they moved on to the next round. If it were me 6 years later, I would have calmly reached for the full glass on the table, right in front of all those shocked faces, and downed it in one go. Then I would have looked up, smiled, and said, "He's kidding," instead of wasting 6 years of my life. Back then, I didn't know he was joking, but I still turned down his father. I've always been serious about love, which has a lot to do with my family background. I want to marry someone I love, and someone who loves me back. Not just get married to someone for money. Mr. Sterling never expected me to refuse. The frown on his face seemed to say I was being ungrateful. But because the situation was urgent, he was forced to soften his tone. I know this is a lot to ask, but Landon's condition is unique. He's an S-class omega. Regular suppressants don't work on him. When his heat hits next month, he'll have a psychotic break without an alpha to soothe him. He sighed. I had an alpha lined up for him, but he refused. Said he has no interest in spending his heat with a stranger. But I started to say something, but Mr. Sterling cut me off. "Jay, I'm begging you. He helped you, he saved you. Can't you help him? Just this once? As soon as he reaches full maturity, you can get a divorce. Please, he's my only child." I fell silent. If it had been anyone else, I would have refused without a second thought. But if it was about repaying a debt, couldn't say no. I hesitated. I wavered. I told Mr. Sterling I needed to think about it. That night, for the first time in a long time, I couldn't sleep. I sat up all night, then pulled out my phone and texted a single word to an unsaved number. "Okay." In the end, I agreed. In our senior year of college, we got married. At the time, I thought I could learn to love him. If there could be love in this marriage, then it wouldn't be so hard to endure. But he was strange. It was like he loved me and hated me at the same time. I've always been clueless when it comes to emotions, so I had no idea what it all meant. It wasn't until years later, after countless nights sleeping alone in an empty room, that I started replaying the past in my head. I thought about that smile, and I finally understood. It was nothing more than a joke. The picture arrived on my phone right after I finished closing up the flower shop. I hadn't been feeling well the last few days, so I decided to close for a while. After getting married, I chose a career path that had nothing to do with my major. The Sterling family was so powerful they didn't care what I did, as long as I didn't embarrass them. Thankfully, I'm good with my hands, and the flower shop made enough to support me. I was walking home, a sandwich in my hand, when I opened my phone, and I saw him again. The alpha Landon was keeping on the side. Maybe keeping wasn't the right word. The alpha was an escort at a club, and Landon was just his biggest client. I don't know what was wrong with the guy. He was basically the other man, but instead of hiding, he was constantly sending me pictures to provoke me. In the photo, the two of them were locked in a passionate kiss at a bar. I'd seen plenty of pictures like this. By now, it didn't even faze me. I calmly took a bite of my sandwich, the taste of the dressing spreading in my mouth. Let's get a divorce. It looks like he's found his true love. Once a top-tier omega reaches full maturity, they no longer need an alpha's comfort. Landon hit that milestone a year into our marriage. I wanted a divorce back then, but then he got pregnant. I actually really like kids. When that escort sent me the first picture of Landon out having fun at a bar, I considered divorce. But our son was so little then, so I put up with it. Now, I don't know if Leo was spoiled by his grandfather, but he's very close to Landon and not so close to me. In the beginning, he'd cry his eyes out if I was gone for even a minute. Now, he seems to resent me. I slowly finished my sandwich and found Landon in my contacts. Come home tonight. We need to talk. He didn't reply. He was probably busy with other things. I put my phone away and started walking toward the place I used to call home. This would probably be the last time I ever walked this way. Landon got home at 2 in the morning. He flipped on the light and was surprised to see me still sitting on the couch. "You're still up?" I looked at him coldly. He reeked of alcohol, but I didn't get up to help him like I used to. "I sent you a message. Did you see it?" He pulled out his phone right in front of me and scrolled for a few minutes before he found it. "Just saw it now. Got buried under other messages," Landon said dismissively. He went to the kitchen for a glass of water and walked slowly toward me. I was on the armchair, so he couldn't sit next to me. He had to take the couch opposite me. Felt a bit like a negotiation. "So, what did you want to talk about?" He set down the glass, the sound of it hitting the table sharp and clear. "If this is about bringing Leo back here, don't bother. He's going to run the Sterling Corporation one day. He needs a proper education, which means he stays at the family estate. It's not about that," I cut him off. He looked taken aback. "Let's get a divorce," I said. "What did you say?" He frowned, his expression filled with disbelief. "A divorce," I repeated patiently. "Tomorrow. I'll walk away with nothing." "You?" Landon took a deep breath, trying to suppress his annoyance. "If there's something you're not happy about, we can discuss it. Leo is still so young. He can't lose his alpha father." "I have no complaints," I said, meeting his gaze in the darkness, my voice calm. "And if you're worried about custody, I don't want the child." I added, "My only condition is the divorce. Businessmen are all about profit, and as the CEO of the Sterling Corporation, Landon never made a losing deal. He was ruthless in the boardroom. I thought this was a pretty good deal for him. There was no reason for him to say no. But he just stared, not answering, and even tugged impatiently at his tie. Landon said, standing up, "I don't agree. Marriage isn't a game. A divorce won't do anyone any good. You should think this over. Whatever you're unhappy about, just tell me. It's late, and I have things to do tomorrow," he said, turning to leave the living room. "I'm going to bed." "But I think a divorce would be good for both of us," I said suddenly. I watched his retreating back. I saw him freeze for a second before he quickened his pace and left. It was like he was running for his life. When I woke up the next day, Landon had already left the villa. He'd slept in the master bedroom last night. I didn't want to be in the same bed as him, so I took the guest room. But I have trouble sleeping in strange beds. And with everything unresolved, I barely slept a wink. I finally got up at 11. I had no appetite, so I just had some porridge and spent the rest of the day reading in the study. Landon still didn't come back, and I couldn't be bothered to wait for him. I put my book down, opened my phone, and another picture popped up. This time it was two hands tightly clasped. I recognized the one with the watch as Landon's. The other alpha again, I figured. So boring. That alpha always loved to provoke me. But maybe he could help me. Let's meet. It was the first time I'd ever replied to him. The pictures stopped coming. The other end went silent. I stood up, threw on a light coat, grabbed my phone, and left the villa. I went to that bar. It had been a long time since I'd been to a place like this. The last time was for a part-time job. Later, Landon decided it was a waste of time, so he quit the job for me and told me to focus on him. I never liked working in bars anyway, so I didn't complain. After I opened the flower shop, I never went to places like this again. Now, looking at the dim, chaotic lights, I had the strange feeling of returning to an old haunt. Suddenly, a pair of hands wrapped around my waist, pulling me into an embrace. I turned in surprise and saw a tall alpha. The dim lights flashed across his face. It was the alpha from the pictures. I frowned, confused, and tried to push him away. But the next second, he smiled, placed a hand on the back of my neck, and gripped it tightly. Then he leaned in and kissed me. I was too shocked to speak. I raised my hand to slap him, but he caught my wrist. He slowly brought my hand to his lips. Then, as I stared in disbelief, he opened his mouth and bit my palm. "Hope we meet again," he said with a suggestive smile, then slipped past me and disappeared into the dance floor. I stood there, completely baffled, my bitten palm throbbing. 2 teeth marks were left behind. I frowned, shaking my hand in disgust as I looked around for a restroom. The next moment, my wrist was grabbed again. I thought it was that alpha again and instinctively slapped his hand away. But he grabbed it again, this time with a force that wouldn't be denied. "Are you insane?" I lost it and spun around, slapping him across the face. But the next second, I was met with a pair of furious eyes. The owner of those eyes was grinding his teeth, looking like he wanted to eat me alive. "Jay, you've got a lot of nerve," he growled. A bright red handprint was already forming on his left cheek. "Cheating on me right in my face, and now you dare to hit me." It was Landon. I frowned, completely bewildered. "Cheating? What are you talking about?" Landon seethed. "Who was that guy just now?" "Jay, so this is why you want a divorce. You found someone new. Have I been neglecting you lately? If you want to play games, I can play along." I was stunned. "That's your boy toy? And you're asking me who he is?" In my mind, Landon had always been a cool, reserved person. But after hearing that possessive CEO routine, I was just silent. "Landon, are you actually insane?" "Great," he said, his grip tightening. "You've insulted me twice for that other man. Jay, you're done for." I had never seen Landon this angry. He dragged me into the passenger seat, locked the doors, and sped back to our neighborhood. Landon hauled me all the way to the master bedroom and threw me onto the bed. He could pin me down with one hand. Even though he was an Omega, he was only a little shorter than me. Because of the cross-level soothing, my own rank had nearly dropped to C-class, and my health was getting worse. He'd been through physical training his whole life. He could probably take on 3 alphas at once. A guy like me? He could take 6 of me. "Landon, calm down." He didn't stop tearing at my clothes. "Calm down? Will that change the fact that my partner cheated on me?" I shouted. "I didn't cheat." He just sneered and didn't say another word, just lowered his head and started biting me. "You never listen to a word I say." I struggled violently. "What am I to you? A toy?" Silence. "Let go." Silence. "Landon." Suddenly, a sharp ringtone cut through the cold air. Landon, who had been biting me, stopped and sat up, clicking his tongue in annoyance. He found his phone in the dark, the white light of the screen illuminating his cold face. I don't know what was said on the other end, but Landon put on the jacket he'd just taken off. He was getting ready to leave. Yeah, I know. I'm on my way. Landon hung up and looked down at me with a warning. Don't go to those places again. Stay home. Without waiting for my reply, he strode out of the room. A moment later, I heard a car driving away. Once I was sure Landon was really gone. My tense body slowly relaxed, but I couldn't stop trembling. Cough, cough. I broke into a violent coughing fit. Took a long time to catch my breath. I shakily got up, fumbled to lock the door, and leaned against the frame, letting out a long sigh of relief. Negotiating a divorce with him wasn't going to work. I needed to find another way. I found a number at the bottom of my contact list and dialed it without hesitation. Hello, Mr. J. Outside the window, the sky was a perfect, clear blue. The white flower beds were filled with colorful blossoms. This was my second time at the Sterling family estate. I'd never wanted to come here, maybe because I was deluding myself, thinking that if I just stayed away, my marriage wouldn't seem so pathetic. Or maybe it was because you came to sign the divorce papers this time? The Omega on the couch across from me sneered. You're finally willing to sign. I thought you'd never give up on your so-called love. Because the master of the Sterling estate was so cruel. Mr. Sterling tilted his chin up slightly. Even though we were both sitting, he had to look down on me. You were so resolute back then. I almost thought your attitude at the wedding was just an act. He was talking about the time he came to me with divorce papers after the 1-year agreement was up, and I refused him. My family life was a mess. Even with both parents around, I felt like an orphan. Things only got better after I presented as an alpha and got into an elite school on a scholarship. Back then, I didn't want my child to experience the same loneliness I did as a kid, so I refused Mr. Sterling. I had told him, as long as there's a child, I will not get a divorce. And Mr. Sterling had just sneered. You'll regret it. Looking back now, I definitely spoke too soon. Leo didn't seem to need a useless alpha father. Just like you said back then, everyone has the potential to regret things. Looking at it now, you're more experienced, and there's truth in what you say. So I regret it. I want a divorce. I looked at Mr. Sterling directly. I won't fight for custody. I just want him to grow up healthy, safe, and happy. That shouldn't be too hard. Mr. Sterling clearly hadn't expected me to be so calm. It took him a moment before his cruel lips parted. So decisive now. Don't come crying back later. If my son hadn't liked you back then, you never would have even stepped foot in my house. If you regret this later, don't you dare come crawling back. I offered a polite smile. I won't regret it. Not anymore. And perhaps you've misunderstood something. Landon's like, for me back then was just a joke from a game. I quickly signed the agreement. Landon's spot had been signed when we first got married. 6 years of my life for 100 million. I pushed the papers across the table. The Sterling family is certainly generous. With that, I got up to leave, not bothering to look at Mr. Sterling's expression. But I hadn't taken more than a few steps before I ran into someone. It was Leo, the child I once treasured. He was running towards me in a hurry, but the moment he saw me, he stopped in his tracks. His expression was a lot like Landon's now. Cold, proud. He had so much of the Sterling family in him, and nothing of the boy who was once my son. Seeing him covered in sweat, I took out a handkerchief, knelt beside him, and gently wiped his forehead. When I was done, I stood up, ready to leave. What are you doing at the estate? He finally spoke his second sentence to me. Did you come to see me? Then his brow furrowed. I told you not to come.
I'm busy.
I don't have time to see you. I'm going to run the Sterling family business one day. Don't come and bother me anymore. I smiled, didn't answer him, and turned to leave the estate. Then I threw the handkerchief in a trash can on the side of the road. It was already 11 at night by the time I got back to the villa. I looked at the empty master bedroom, felt nothing, and turned to the walk-in closet to pack my clothes. We were getting a divorce soon. It wouldn't be right to keep living in my ex-husband's house. It's not like we never had our tender moments. During my ruts, I'd always be lost in a haze. He loved to bite my scent gland, even though he could never mark me. After every rut, I'd have to wrap my neck up tightly. Even though Landon had reached full maturity, he still went into heat, just much milder. With his constitution, he could just endure it. But he loved to curl up beside me, whispering over and over in my ear that he liked me, loved me, talked about our future. But once it was over, he'd go back to being cold and distant, as if none of it ever happened. Turns out, pheromones alone were enough for him to tell lies called love. If I was going to leave, I had to be thorough. The next morning, I went to clear out the flower shop. I was planning to move to a new city, but I hadn't been cleaning long before the bell on the door chimed. I looked up and saw an unwelcome guest. A blonde, green-eyed alpha. Landon's affair. He looked around, and his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Finally found you," he said, walking quickly towards me. I was holding a flower pot. I turned and used it as a shield between us. I looked at him warily. Was the other man here to start a fight? He completely ignored my attitude and kept smiling. "Hi, do you have any white roses?" I answered curtly, "No." Then I went back to cleaning up the shop. When he saw I was ignoring him, he finally looked a little hurt. "Hey, did I do something to offend you?" I found that funny and gave him a sharp look. "What do you think? Are you talking about the other night at the bar when I kissed you?" He blinked. "Oh, darling, that was just a dare. I didn't mean it. I apologize. Truth or dare again." I'd learned my lesson the hard way once I wasn't about to go through it again. I gave him a dismissive nod. I really don't sell roses. I have no interest in selling my own pheromones. If you want some, go buy them somewhere else. I don't sell roses. I didn't want anything to do with Landon or anything related to him. All right. He seemed disappointed, then asked, "Hey, you don't like me, do you?" At that, I finally stopped what I was doing. I looked up at him coldly and nodded. He just laughed. "But I really like you." I took a deep breath, my face hardening. "Get out. Do you hate me because of Landon?" He seemed to have a natural talent for getting on people's nerves. He was here to provoke me. "Perhaps you've misunderstood something. He and I are just business partners. And I'm not some escort. That was just a little joke I played on you." Besides sending those pictures, he also liked to send messages about what Landon did at the bar. Once, he told me he was an alpha with a tragic backstory who worked as an escort, and that he and Landon had met over a drink. So he was lying too. "Let's get properly acquainted." He held out his hand. "My name is Morris. I'm Mr. Sterling's international business partner. You might have smelled my pheromones on him. I'm sorry if that gave you the wrong idea." When I didn't respond, he forcefully took my hand. "If I remember correctly, you and Mr. Sterling are getting a divorce, right?" He smiled again, revealing two sharp canines. "Is it because of me?" I snatched my hand away. "Don't flatter yourself." Morris leaned in. "If it's not because of Landon, then what are you so angry about? It's not like I meant for him to get my pheromones on him. But what can I do when we have a 92% compatibility rating?" "Here," he said, reaching for the scent patch on my neck. "I'll let you get some of mine back on me." I hadn't expected Morris to go straight for my neck. I couldn't dodge in time, and he tore off a corner of the patch. The scent of roses filled the entire flower shop. "Ha, so that's your scent," he said, taking a sniff. "Guess I got my roses after all." I quickly pressed the patch back on. "Is this sexual harassment?" Morris didn't deny it, just shrugged. If I recall, the gender laws don't protect alphas. The implication was clear. Calling the cops would be useless. I shot him a glare. "You damn pervert." He didn't deny that either. It was 4 hours later by the time I finally got rid of Morris. Thinking about his actions made my skin crawl. While I was cleaning the shop, he was either messing with me or destroying the flowers. He only settled down after I got really angry. I delivered some of the flowers to regular clients and arranged the rest into bouquets to sell. But Morris bought all of them, including the ones he'd ruined. I was finally free. After closing up, I took a cab to a hotel, trying to get away from him. Morris didn't follow. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he'd finally given up. But when I got out of the cab, I saw him again. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm staying here for a few days, too. He gave me an innocent look. I didn't believe him for a second, because right in front of me, he swiped a key card and opened the room right next to mine. Before he went in, he smiled at me. What a coincidence. After a full day of cleaning, I was too exhausted to argue. I went into my room, took a shower, and then opened my phone to look for a new hotel. But I must have been more tired than I thought, because I fell asleep halfway through my search. I woke up again when I vaguely heard the sound of a key card unlocking my door. Raindrops hit the window with a dull thud. A large hand grabbed my ankle, which was sticking out from under the covers. My eyes flew open. In the dim room, a tall figure was slowly approaching. "Jay, you've got some nerve." I heard him grit his teeth, daring to actually go through with a divorce. "Have I been too easy on you? Maybe you need to be taught a lesson to learn how to behave. How did you get in here?" I could see who it was now. I tried to kick him away, but he held on tight. The kick ended up looking more like a flirtatious gesture. He chuckled, though I couldn't tell if he was mocking my pathetic attempt or my ignorance. "You didn't know? This is a Sterling family property. 6 years and you haven't learned a thing. Looks like I'll have to teach you how to be my partner all over again." I pushed against his chest as he pressed closer. "What are you doing? We're getting a divorce. The proceedings have already started. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. You can try. But don't forget, I'm an Omega. The Gender Protection Act doesn't protect alphas." He held his phone out in front of my face. "Go ahead. Let's see who gets arrested in the end." I saw the casual indifference on his face. And the cruelty. "What do you really want?" I was at my wit's end. For the first time in my life, I cursed the new gender regulation that gave alphas a 13% discount on shopping. Landon pinned my hands and pressed down on me. "What's this about divorce proceedings? Why did they suddenly appear without my consent?" I took a deep breath. "Because you already signed the divorce papers when we got married." "When did I?" He stopped mid-sentence. "Forget it. Let's not talk about that. Open your device right now and cancel it. Stop throwing a tantrum." "Landon, I'm not throwing a tantrum." I tried to explain again, seriously. "I really want a divorce. For 6 years, my rank dropped for you. I quit my job for you. Before we were married, I ran your errands. I was your gopher. I waited on you hand and foot. Isn't that enough?" "No." He shot it down immediately. "Jay, I helped you. I saved you. Is your life worth so little?" A wave of helplessness washed over me, and I almost lost the will to struggle. "But Landon, do you love me?" For once, Landon was silent. Then he scoffed. "Sometimes, I really think you're ridiculously naive. You're 28 years old. Don't act like a child. Isn't a comfortable life enough for you? Can you stop being so naive and childish? Does love even matter? Who in our circle gets married for love? There are so many couples in our circle who can't stand each other. How many of them have actually divorced? A marriage can work without love. Can you stop being so dramatic?" He was so certain, so convinced. It drained every last bit of strength I had. So it really was a joke. All those vows, they were all lies. I started to tremble and I stopped struggling. I looked at Landon's face, cold and mocking. I didn't know what expression to make. All I could do was say with a shaky voice, "But I was never part of your world." My voice was choked with tears. "Landon, what were these last 6 years? These absurd, laughable 6 years, what did they even mean?" "Hold on." The light suddenly flicked on, illuminating the entire room. The brightness made me squint, and I turned my head toward the source of the voice. Morris was leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a bathrobe, looking sleepy. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't right. Harassing your ex-husband after a divorce?" A playful look crossed his face. "You sounded so casual, so indifferent about it at the bar. Why are you trying to stop him now that he wants out? If I'm not mistaken, aren't you supposed to be on your way overseas for a business deal, Mr. Sterling? Coming back halfway through, it makes one question your commitment to your work." Morris's unspoken threat was practically screaming in Landon's ear. "It seems our company's partnership with yours needs to be re-evaluated." Landon's brow furrowed tightly. He stared at Morris for a long moment before sneering. What's it to you? Oh, it has a lot to do with me. Morris strode forward, yanked Landon off me in an instant, and swung his fist. The two of them started fighting in the room. In the end, Morris, who was of the same rank, came out on top. Landon was pinned to the floor, his head bleeding. Eventually, his device automatically called for an ambulance. He can really fight, Morris said, sitting on the floor, a few of his buttons torn off. Your ex-husband is… Morris's expression suddenly changed. What's wrong with you? He scrambled onto the bed and wrapped his arms around me. I was stiff as a board, my face pale. I tried to say I was fine, but my mouth felt like it was glued shut. It wasn't until Morris had soothed me again and again, stroking my back, that I finally seemed to find my voice. I'm fine. Just shaken up. It's an old thing. My voice was hoarse and I coughed a few times. Morris kept petting my hair, and this time I didn't push him away. His tone was light, almost joking, as he whispered, "Oh dear, the Omega Protection Association is going to get me for this. If I don't come back, you'll remember to visit me. Won't you? After all, I only got arrested for you." I didn't want to talk. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. After a while, I heard him speak again, his voice tentative. "How about, I help you get back at him? Don't get the wrong idea. I can't stand him either. But I like you, He helped me in high school." I suddenly spoke up, telling Morris a story about a regular alpha's miserable high school days. I got into Apex High on the back of my excellent grades and the fact that I presented as an alpha too hard requirements. The brochures said it was a place that cultivated the elite. I applied because I saw tuition and fees were waived. The school was indeed full of future social elites, which is why a regular alpha like me stuck out like a sore thumb. The reason I was bullied was simple. They said I was poor and didn't act like an alpha. I never wanted to present as an alpha in the first place. At first, when they beat me up, I could stomach it. But then they started targeting me during the time the cafeteria served free meals. I couldn't take it anymore, so I beat them up. Their parents screamed about sending me to jail, and the school was ready to expel me. In the end, it was Landon who stepped in and saved me. To repay him, I ran his errands for 2 years. Later, at the graduation party, there was a fire. He carried me out and saved my life. My life became inseparable from his. For once, Morris was silent for a while. "So you married him to repay a debt?" I didn't deny it. Then I heard his voice, full of sarcasm. "A guy like him would save someone from a fire? I don't buy it. Did you see it with your own eyes? What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying you should check his schedule for those few days. If I remember correctly, his medical records have the exact time." His words were incredibly pointed. They immediately made me think of the medical records Mr. Sterling gave me when we first got married. To help me better understand Landon's condition, Mr. Sterling had sent me all of his medical information, from childhood to adulthood. That stack of papers was now at the family estate. Speeding through the rainy night was the craziest thing I'd ever done. Morris had wanted to drive me, but he got picked up by the Protection Association before we could even leave. I took his car and floored it all the way to the estate. The security guard at the gate saw my face and didn't dare to stop me. I slammed on the gas and nearly crashed into the flower bed by the entrance. I didn't have an umbrella. I was soaked to the bone as I rushed into the mansion, ignoring the butler who tried to ask me something, and ran all the way up to the second floor, to the room Landon and I used to share. I practically stumbled into the room, my hands trembling as I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out the file from 6 years ago. I flipped through the pages quickly, searching for something I had never paid attention to before. The medical treatment time, precise down to the second. Interstellar Year 3098, August 12th, 14 hours 3 minutes and 49 seconds. Entered medical bay. Medication combo 1, duration 6 hours. The single line of text stabbed into my brain, tearing my nerves apart. The world spun. Rainwater dripped from my hair onto the paper, and the ink slowly blurred, like a great black dragon opening its maw to swallow me whole. Everything went dark for a moment. He was in treatment on August 12th. So who saved me? The door creaked open. I turned my head stiffly and saw a face in the doorway that looked just like Landon's. Dad? He asked hesitantly. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? His face slowly came into focus. A handkerchief touched my cheek, gently wiping it. Then my hair, my scalp. You're completely soaked. Why didn't you use an umbrella? He asked again. He stood on his tiptoes and pressed his face against my neck. It was Leo, not Landon. I realized this in a daze and managed to force a smile for him. But my mind was filled with the memory of waking up in the hospital. Landon, dressed in a hospital gown, was sitting by my bedside. When I opened my eyes, I heard his arrogant voice. You're finally awake. Guess my efforts to save you weren't for nothing. I had just woken up. My mind was foggy, and I heard him say that. I asked instinctively, Landon, was it you who saved me from the fire? After a long pause, I heard him grunt softly and say, of course. He took the credit. Thinking back now, in those few seconds of silence, were you feeling guilty? Landon, you lied to me. You lied to me for 10 years. For 10 whole years, I've been living in your lie, unable to break free. When I came to my senses, I was sitting in the office of the Omega Protection Association. I had a gut feeling Morris would know something, so the moment they opened the next morning, I rushed in and requested to see him. Morris was brought in. Oh my God, darling, you really came to see me. Even in custody, he was as defiant as ever, even in the mood to tease me. You know something, don't you? He didn't answer my question, just stared at me for a long moment before sighing softly. All right, I do know a lot, including things about your childhood. You forgot me.
I'm heartbroken.
You always had to get to the bottom of things. You loved talking to the little blades of grass. You loved saving your dinner to eat right before bed, so you wouldn't be hungry while you slept. You hate being in debt to anyone, which is why you followed Landon around for a decade. You're trapped by your own sense of morality. You've never once lived for yourself. I'm not telling you the truth because I want you to have your own future. He spoke with a seriousness I had never heard from him before. The future. I had never thought about that word. In my memories, I had a very small, dilapidated place. It was synonymous with dampness, pain, and filth. It was a heavy, oppressive black, constantly piled with empty bottles, dark, with no light at all. I had 2 playmates, 2 blades of grass under a tree. The environment in the fringe was terrible. Green plants were incredibly rare. We grew up together in the mud, surviving every spring, summer, fall, and winter. In that dim basement, I couldn't tell day from night. I didn't know when tomorrow would come. I only knew that time would bring hunger, and endless dampness. Of course, I wouldn't look forward to tomorrow. After all, I didn't have a tomorrow. Later, I escaped the fringe with someone. We got a home, but that person left when I turned 18, leaving only a note behind. I was abandoned. I told Morris this, but the next second, Morris reached out and ruffled my hair. You haven't even seen the world yet. How do you know you don't have a tomorrow? Here's the plan. You go get your divorce certificate first. Once that's done, I'll take you to see the world. I'll be your tour guide. Then he lowered his voice. Don't worry, I'll be out of here soon. And no more pessimistic talk. Don't you remember telling me when you were a kid that you were going to take your 2 grass friends on a trip around the world? I still remember. He winked at me. His smile was as sweet as honey. Before I left, I asked Morris to help me draw up a contract. It felt a little wrong asking a guy in custody for help, but he was one of the few reliable people I knew. I took Morris's car back to the estate. The divorce certificate was being delivered directly to the Sterling mansion. I just had to tie up one last loose end. Since Landon wasn't the one who saved me, I didn't have to accommodate him anymore. Those 6 years could count as repayment for him vouching for me in high school. I opened the car door and immediately saw Leo standing by the entrance, crying his eyes out. The moment Leo saw me, he ran over and threw himself at me. He couldn't hold back his sobs, and his voice trembled. Dad, are you divorcing father? Dad, are you leaving me? I gently patted his back and soothed him in a low voice. I picked him up and carried him into the mansion. Landon was sitting on the sofa, a bandage wrapped around his head, his face pale. He was watching me, knowing he couldn't stop what was happening. His face had lost its usual coldness. I turned to the butler. "Where's the divorce certificate?" The butler handed it to me. I took it and let out a long sigh of relief. "You're that happy to be divorced from me?" Landon's face darkened. "Jay, don't regret this. I'll make sure you never see Leo again." He sounded as if he'd found my weakness again. But I had already said I didn't want custody. A child would not be my weakness. I put Leo down and took the contract out of my bag. The 100 million the Sterling family gave me, I'm voluntarily gifting it to Leo. Leo immediately grabbed my sleeve, his expression anxious. "Dad, don't leave me." I stroked his head again. "You'll get the best education with the Sterling family. You'll become a great, powerful person, just like the heroes in the stories we used to read. This 100 million is the most expensive gift I can give you. If you want to see me in the future, you can call me. But Father said that only if I work hard and behave, you'll have a better future." He suddenly seemed to remember something, then turned and shouted at Landon. "You lied to me. You don't have a father who loves you. So why did you trick me into making my dad leave? You liar." Landon's face turned completely black. "Butler, take the young master upstairs." Without another word, ignoring Leo's loud protests, he walked straight up to me. Leo was dragged upstairs, struggling all the way. The surroundings gradually fell silent. I wasn't cheating. Those pictures were just for show. If that's what's bothering you, I'll stop. It'll never happen again. I know you don't really want a divorce. You love me. As long as you withdraw the divorce, I can pretend none of this ever happened." His tone was strained, a little awkward, as if he were granting me some great favor. For the first time ever, he made me laugh. I couldn't help it, I laughed out loud. "What's so funny?" he asked, frowning. I laughed for a good while before I finally stopped. "If your goal was to make a fool of me, you succeeded. I really did act like your servant for 6 years. But Landon, I honestly feel sorry for you. You have such an overbearing Omega father that you've lost the ability to love. No one will ever truly love you. No one." I pulled the medical record out of my bag and threw it in his face. "Yes, you didn't cheat. But our marriage was a lie from the very beginning. Your father doesn't love you, your partner doesn't love you, and even your own son doesn't love you. If I were you, I'd just die." Seeing the shock on his face, I felt a long overdue sense of relief. The chains were finally broken. After leaving the Sterling estate that day, I got my head straight and left the city, heading abroad. Morris came with me. We went to the desert, climbed snow-capped mountains, and lay in fields of flowers, soaking in the quiet of the countryside. It was so peaceful, as if it were just the two of us. One day, I asked him again who he was. Under a sky full of stars, he lay on the grass with a stalk of grass in his mouth. "You could say I'm your childhood friend." A look of understanding dawned on my face. So grass really could turn into a person. Morris knew exactly what I was thinking. "I'm not the two blades of grass," Morris yelled, interrupting my train of thought. He shot up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. My hair used to be black. I thought for a moment and finally dredged up a figure from the depths of my memory. So it really was him. I smiled and Morris tackled me. "Stop smiling. I told you I'm not the two blades of grass. Well, it turns out I have a lot of friends. And it turns out I have a future, too. Landon's extra. My name is Landon Sterling, the sole heir to the Sterling family. My alpha father died early, leaving my omega father to raise me alone. The economy is tough these days, and it's even harder for an omega to make it in the business world. I understood my father's struggles, so I excelled at everything. I almost never defied him, even when he made me kneel until midnight or pushed me through strength training until I collapsed. I never complained. The first time I defied him was in high school. I insisted on protecting an alpha of average rank, whose father was the kind of social parasite my father despised. After I saved him, I was sent to an undeveloped jungle for half a month of training during summer break. Even though I spent 3 days in a healing pod when I got back, I was happy, because I had gained a gopher, the kind that follows you around and does whatever ridiculous thing you ask without hesitation. That's right, his name is Jay. Jay was something of a legend at Apex High. A poor, gentle, and all-encompassing alpha. A beautiful alpha. Honestly, if he were an omega, countless sons of high society would have gone crazy for him. But unfortunately, he was an alpha, the kind who could beat those high society sons to a pulp. I'd heard bits and pieces about him being bullied, from the omegas who admired him. Sometimes I'd see him after a particularly bad beating, lying on the ground, taking forever to get up, then slowly heading to the cafeteria with his lunchbox, completely indifferent to his injuries. Later, those alphas did something that finally pushed Jay over the edge. Jay sent all his bullies to the hospital. He could really fight. I didn't save him because I was kind. I saved him because he beat up my rivals. Seeing those arrogant, self-proclaimed elite alphas lying in the hospital, black and blue, was incredibly satisfying. He put on a great show for me, so of course I had to protect him. Maybe I'd even get to see a bigger show. One day, he found me and said he wanted to thank me. He asked me, "What can I do for you?" I thought for a moment and said, "You're a good fighter. Be my gopher from now on." And just like that, he became my gopher. We started spending more time together. As I said, he was a legend at Apex High, not just for his looks, but for his personality. He didn't act like an alpha. He was genuinely gentle and never lost his temper. He had this head of black curly hair that made him seem incredibly soft, sparking a desire to mess with him. But the reason he was gentle and even tempered was because he was always spacing out. Once, I was talking to him, and he started zoning out again, his eyes staring blankly ahead. I couldn't resist ruffling his curly hair. "Why are you always spacing out?" He snapped out of it and slowly mumbled one word. "Hungry." Spacing out conserves energy. Hearing him say those two sentences so seriously made me burst out laughing. He didn't seem to understand why I was laughing. He just stared at me for a bit, then zoned out again. Couldn't take it. How could there be such an adorable alpha? He was a completely different species from those smelly, arrogant ones. I pulled Jay up. "Forget it, I'll take you to eat." Couldn't let my gopher starve. We were like that for 2 years until we graduated high school. On the day of our class party, I couldn't go because my pheromones were out of control. I had planned to confess to Jay that day. I never expected that the next news I'd hear of him was that he was in the hospital because of a fire. I had him transferred to the Sterling family's private hospital and sat by his bed, watching him all night. I gathered all the information about the fire and learned that a black-haired alpha had saved him. Jay is a person who values loyalty and debts. I had only vouched for him, and he became my follower for 2 years. So what about a life-saving debt? Would Jay's attention be drawn to that other alpha? Couldn't allow it. Jay could only look at me. I watched him slowly open his eyes and ask that question. "So, was it you who saved me?" I was silent for a moment. I never thought fate would favor me like this. Jay didn't even know who saved him. I admit I'm selfish, cold, and hypocritical. But does it matter what kind of person you become, as long as you achieve your goal? It doesn't. Not at all. Getting what you want is all that matters. That other alpha was on the brink of death anyway. As long as he died, Jay would never know the truth. That way, the only person Jay would see was me. Jay was still my gopher. At a party our senior year of college, I pulled him over to drink with me. I watched him get so drunk his eyes were hazy. The bottle on the table spun, and the truth or dare landed on me again. This time the question was, "Is there anyone you like among the people here?" Jay shook his head, reaching for a glass. But I felt a playful urge to tease him. "Yeah, there is, Jay." Seeing him freeze on the spot, I smiled again. "Jay, you idiot. I like you." Who would have thought that a week later, my father would hand me 2 agreements. They were completely blank. "Sign them. Sign them and you can be with that broke alpha." "Who? Who else?" "That curly-haired hanger-on of yours." I frowned. How did my father know about Jay? My father was extremely controlling. He would destroy anything I liked. Why him? Didn't you say you liked him yourself? This time you'd better protect him well. Don't blame me if I break your toy again. My father wrinkled his nose in disgust. Why do you always like such fragile, poor things? just like your father. Unpresentable. I lowered my head in silence and didn't say another word. My father pushed the 2 blank agreements toward me. Sign them. I've already asked that alpha. He's agreed. Or are you willing to let him slip through your fingers? Of course not. I didn't hesitate any longer and signed the agreements cleanly. Only then did my father smile with satisfaction. He had once again read my mind. I knew my family was a bit dysfunctional, and Jay wouldn't like it. But he agreed to marry me, which meant he liked me too. He was always very serious about marriage. As long as I protected him, everything would be fine. We would be very happy. Very happy. Morris is extra. My name is Morris. I also have a Chinese name, River. Jay gave it to me. Jay and I met over a bottle of expired nutrient solution. It was his dinner. He handed it to me, a look of reluctance on his face, but he still said softly, "Eat it. You don't have to pay me back." Okay, maybe some people think giving someone an expired nutrition pack isn't great. But I wasn't just anyone. I was a person who was starving to death. I wasn't born lucky. My mother was the mistress of a mafia boss in Y country. I was his illegitimate son. But I was born at the wrong time. Before I could grow up, my half-brother started trying to eliminate all his rivals. Most of the mafia boss's children died in assassinations. I, on the other hand, was smuggled into C country's fringe under my mother's protection. But fate doesn't favor vermin like me. My mother died. She starved to death on the smuggling ship. I stumbled into the fringe and eventually collapsed under a tree, unconscious. When I woke up, I saw a head of black curly hair. He was squatting on the ground, whispering something to 2 blades of grass. Like a little black sheep. Was the sheep eating the grass? I tried to get up, but all I could manage was a slight twitch before I fell back to the ground. I didn't get up, but I scared the little sheep. The sheep didn't make a sound. He slowly lifted his head, and his pure black eyes met mine. A face so pale it was almost transparent, with no expression. But with that curly hair, I could still see a softness in him, a gentle harmlessness. We stared at each other for a long time before I unconsciously looked away. I wasn't sure if I was blushing. I was so hungry my face was probably gray. I likely couldn't have blushed if I tried. But, God, why would you create such an adorable little sheep? Are you sending an angel to collect me in my final moments before I starve to death? Perhaps angels are sheep. The little sheep suddenly appeared and bestowed upon me a bottle of nutrient solution. I quickly swallowed it and finally felt alive again. The little sheep went back to talking to the grass. I regained some strength, crawled over to his side, and stared at the grass with him. Who are they? My friends. The little sheep could be friends with grass? Night fell, and the little sheep asked me why I wasn't going home. I shook my head. I don't have a home. The little sheep told me he didn't have a home either. We sat under the tree for a while longer. When it was completely dark, the little sheep brushed himself off, stood up, and took me back to his place. Okay, actually, I shamelessly begged him to. A pitch-black basement. The little sheep said this was where he lived. When we first went in, I kicked a bottle every 2 steps. The liquor inside had been drunk down to the last drop. We lay down together on a piece of cardboard. This was the little sheep's bed. The little sheep said this wasn't his home, just a place he stayed. A home should be a warm, bright house filled with fresh flowers, not a dark space filled with a mix of filth and dampness. As he spoke, the little sheep went quiet. I heard his stomach growl. The little sheep had given me his dinner. The little sheep was so good. I had to repay him. Later, to keep from starving, the little sheep and I started scavenging outside. Occasionally, we'd find expired nutrition packs in the trash. The little sheep taught me how to survive in the fringe. Taught me how to stay away from danger. He said if you eat dinner right before bed, you won't have trouble sleeping from hunger, and you won't wake up starving in the middle of the night. He said he had 2 little grass friends and that he'd introduce me to them next time. The little sheep brought me joy. It was almost like I was back in the days when my mother was still alive. But happiness is always fleeting. One night, the basement door was suddenly thrown open. The little sheep was dragged away. The warmth in my arms vanished, and I shot awake to see a man reeking of alcohol start to beat the little sheep. The little sheep seemed used to being woken up and beaten in the middle of the night. He kept his mouth shut tight and didn't make a sound. I tried to stop him and was kicked to the ground. He grabbed me by the hair and forced my head up to look at him. "You dare to bring another stray home? Is it because I haven't been home to beat you in a while? Are you getting too comfortable?" This was the little sheep's father. His mother was out gambling. I heard the man screaming like a rabid dog. That day, I was beaten black and blue and dragged far away. It always rained at night in the fringe. I crawled back to the basement, bit by bit, the rain washing the blood from my face. I was covered in mud. I forced myself to look up at the little sheep, who was sitting numbly on the cardboard. He had a bright red handprint on his face too. He looked down at me. "Why are you back? Go, hurry. This isn't a home." I didn't answer him. Instead, I said, "Little sheep, let's find a home." Finding a home was hard. We were homeless at first. It was only after we presented as alphas that the fringe sent us to school. But the fringe only covered sending us, not paying for anything. My grades were bad, so after graduation, I started fighting in the underground market. When the little sheep found out, he'd occasionally join me. We saved up money and rented a tiny apartment. Just one room with a bed and a table and chairs. The little sheep and I slept together, partly to save money, and partly so I could quickly hold and comfort him when he woke up from nightmares. The little sheep always had nightmares, almost always about being beaten. I would always hold him immediately and whisper, "It's okay. It's okay. We're home." Not outside in the wind and rain, not in a damp, dark basement. We had our first home. We relied on each other, sleeping side by side every night. The little sheep was a great student and got into Apex High. He'd occasionally fight in matches during school breaks to earn money for food and rent. I saved my money to buy a house. Later, the little sheep told me he could have dropped out to work with me, but an Omega had saved him and he owed him a debt, so he couldn't leave school. That was fine. I didn't want him to drop out anyway. A home can't have two illiterates. We watched the money in our account grow little by little. It still wasn't enough to buy a house, but it was enough for us to live a normal life. At least we didn't have to scavenge anymore. Until one day, I saw the little sheep get out of a hovercar. I'd seen those cars before. The bosses who came to watch the fights at the underground market all rode in them. An Omega patted the little sheep's head and looked around with disdain. "So run down. Can people actually live here? Jay, why don't you just come home with me?" The little sheep's brow furrowed for a second, and he shook his head almost instinctively, without even thinking. "This is my home." Yes, this was the little sheep's home. This was my home. This was the port we had found for ourselves after years of drifting. The anxiety in my heart was soothed, but it was replaced by another emotion called unwillingness. If I were more capable, could I give the little sheep a better place to live? I waited until the Omega left before I went upstairs. As soon as I walked in, I saw the little sheep tipping his head back to drink some water. Sunlight clung to him like a child longing for a touch. His black eyes were like deep lakes with flecks of gold. I was stunned for a moment. "How did you get so hurt?" The little sheep frowned and walked over with a medical spray. A warm hand covered my eyes, and the next second, a small amount of medicine covered my wounds, creating a slight itch. It slowly spread over my whole body. "Anywhere else?" "Let me see." He tried to lift my shirt to check for wounds. Being highly sensitive, I instinctively shoved the surprise I'd been preparing all day into his arms. "Is this a flower?" Jay held a bouquet of colorful, assorted flowers. They were fake flowers I had made. Real flowers were too expensive for us to afford. But the little sheep loved flowers, so I spent a long time learning how to make them, and finally managed to create a bouquet. "Yeah, a gift," I said, looking at the surprise in the little sheep's eyes, and smiled. "Little sheep, I hope we can be together every day." When did I fall in love with the little sheep? I don't know. Maybe it was the first time I saw him. Or maybe it was on the most ordinary day during the countless days and nights we spent relying on each other. On a bright and sunny morning, falling in love with the sleepy-eyed angel before me. Was it that bottle of nutrient solution that made me love him? Was it the way he called me River? Was it because he had a soft heart? Was it because of his pure eyes? Maybe. I once took Jay to my mother's favorite place, a church. We had been homeless for so long then, desperate for God's salvation. But I knelt for a long time and remained just a bug in fate's eyes, until I couldn't help but open my eyes, wanting to see the merciless God. Instead, I saw a beam of light fall from God's hands, enveloping Jay, who was in front of me. I suddenly understood. God was merciful after all. He bestowed his grace, and so an angel descended to earth. After seeing that Omega, I started fighting like a madman, hoping to earn more money. One day, as I came out of the underground arena covered in wounds, I met a middle-aged man. He was my older brother's enemy, and also my mother's brother. He had been searching for so many years and finally found me. He said he could help me kill my brother and become the head of the organization. Besides avenging my mother, the second thought in my mind was that I could finally give the little sheep a good life. I rushed home to find the little sheep, wanting to share the good news. But the little sheep had left a note, saying he went to a high school reunion. I wanted to find him immediately, but I was afraid I'd miss him again. So I hastily wrote on a piece of paper, "Wait for me to get home. I have good news for you." But I never got to tell the little sheep that I had found my family. A fire broke out at the little sheep's reunion. I forced my way into the blaze, solidifying my pheromones to shield him as I carried him out. I suffered severe burns, and my brain was damaged from the pheromone overload. My uncle took me back to Y country for treatment. I was in a coma for 3 years, placed in a gene repair pod by my uncle. When I woke up, I looked completely different, more like my long-dead father. My rank even jumped to S-class. I spent a year in physical therapy, then flew back to C country to see the little sheep. But I was met with the news that the little sheep was married to the Omega I had seen downstairs that day. After that, I never set foot in C country again. I threw myself into the battle for leadership. In the end, I brought the former leader's head and placed it on my mother's grave. I thought I would never see the little sheep again, until I ran into the little sheep's partner, Landon Sterling, in Y country. He had been set up and was going into heat. He was hiding in a dark alley on my usual route home, his face flushed. I remembered he was a high-level Omega and could endure it on his own. This was a small path on the way to my mother's old house. Since it was blocked, I turned to leave, but he stumbled up and grabbed me. His pheromones wrapped around me. I punched him away and looked down to see the desire and submission in his eyes. An idea slowly formed. I called the Omega Protection Association and had Landon sent to the hospital. While he was unconscious, I ran a compatibility test. 92%. High enough to affect the minds of both the Alpha and Omega. But I felt it didn't apply to me. When I saw him, I only felt disgust. But seeing him, I inexplicably thought of the little sheep. Finally, I couldn't resist and returned to C country under the pretext of a business partnership. I saw the person who had haunted my dreams for 5 years. But he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy. Seeing the little sheep back in the same state as when we first met filled me with anger, confusion, and heartache. Little sheep, you said you would only marry for love. Why are you living in love? Yet you are still so sad. Back in Y country, I suffered from countless sleepless nights, haunted by the sadness in the little sheep's eyes. Little sheep, you're not happy. Then come with me. I made a decision. I would make them divorce. I returned to C country and started getting close to Landon, occasionally letting my pheromones rub off on him. I had someone Photoshop a large number of intimate pictures of me and Landon and sent them to the little sheep, even though I threw up for a long time after looking at each one. The little sheep was a hard person to get close to. If I didn't make him remember me, I would never have a chance to get near him. I needed the little sheep to remember me, but I couldn't let him know who I was. I didn't want the little sheep to know that River could be so despicable. The plan moved quickly, mostly because Landon was so cooperative. I planned to clarify my relationship with Landon after the little sheep and Landon divorced. The divorce step, I succeeded. The second step, Take the little sheep on a trip around the world and find a new home. This step had a small hiccup. We were watching the sea then, and the sea breeze was messing up the little sheep's hair. Morris? He turned to look at me. For a moment, I couldn't tell which was deeper, the sea or his eyes. You're the one who saved me, right? I was silent for a long time before I slowly nodded. You were seriously injured, weren't you? The scars from the fire hadn't completely faded. A palm-sized, twisted scar was on my chest. Can I see it? His eyes pleaded. Little sheep, you know I could never refuse you. I unbuttoned my shirt, revealing the ugly scar. The little sheep trembled slightly. His fingers traced over it, as light as a feather falling on the wound. His eyes filled with sorrow. I felt a slight itch, and then it felt like the scar was being burned by fire again, accompanied by a sharp pain. The little sheep treated me like a treasure. Why did I feel like a bullet had just pierced my chest? After that incident, I intensified my efforts to corner the Sterling family in international trade, temporarily forcing them back to their domestic market. Landon was an idiot in marriage, but he wasn't dumb in business. But I never expected his son to grow up and start a new company, going head-to-head with Landon after establishing himself. I've been laughing about that for the past few days, and then I have to force myself to stop under the little sheep's confused gaze. This time, I brought the little sheep back to my hometown. It happened to be the spring festival, so I had him change into traditional clothes with me and we headed to the snowy mountains. The little sheep was very interested in this kind of event and pulled me along in front. The clothes were a bit thin, so we had to wrap ourselves in our pheromones. The scent of roses mixed with the cold of the snow filled my senses, making me a little dizzy. The wind lifted the decorative gauze on the back of the little sheep's clothes. The gauze fluttered lightly, like wings about to take flight. As we neared the end, the little sheep turned to look at me, his eyes crinkling into a smile. River, thank you. He recognized me. When did you? My dizzy brain couldn't process it. He smiled and said, probably when you were holding me at the hotel. I thought it was you, but you didn't seem to want me to know you were River. But I was so happy today, I couldn't help but say it. There was a hint of apology in his words, but his eyes were still smiling. Jay was dressed in a long white robe embroidered with green vines, like spring growing out of the snow and wind. He was the unyielding spirit of spring in the middle of a snowstorm. Couldn't help it. I grabbed his hand and pulled him into a tight embrace. I kissed the spring.